Mr. Carl Lemley feels it would be a little unkind to present this picture without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Welcome to the Rotten Horror Picture Show.
Hey everyone, welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the podcast where we talk about the 200 best horror movies on RottenTomatoes.com. My name is Clay, and with me as always is Amanda. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm pretty good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm actually very excited about what we're talking about today, because last time on our first episode we did The Shining, which was number 101, which was kind of surprising.
Still mind-blowing, yeah.
And we hit the randomizer button, and this time we were going all the way up to number 14. I feel like a radio DJ. All the way up to number 14 with Frankenstein.
Ooh.
1931 Frankenstein, directed by James Whale, starring Colin Clive, Boris Karloff, Mae Clark, and John Bowles. And have you seen this one before?
Many, many moons ago when I was a little kid.
Yeah. And did it make an impression on you at the time?
Not really.
Yeah.
No, I think I was just overwhelmed by the monster and didn't really get any of the more deep thematic things going on.
Have you read the book?
Yes, I have. Yeah, of course I have.
This is one of those ones where I think I've had the book. I think I have like 2 or possibly 3 different versions of the book on my shelf as we speak.
Really?
And I have not read either of them.
You should give it a shot.
I know.
If I remember, it's not a very long book.
It's the thing that always stops me, and this kind of goes with a lot of book-to-movie translations, is I go into it thinking about the movie. And it takes me a while to switch into book mode.
Yeah.
So especially with a book like Frankenstein, which I think I read through it once a long time ago. But when you start Frankenstein, it is so much not like the movie,
right,
that it really takes me a long time to get into. And we'll talk about that stuff when we get into it. But yeah, we'll play the trailer real quick, and then we will talk about Frankenstein.
When this dead hand moves, the monster created by a man they called Mad is turned loose to strike terror into the hearts of men. To shock women into uncontrolled hysteria.
Elizabeth!
To prey upon the innocence of children. This is the story you've heard about, talked about. The spine-tingling, blood-chilling story that stuns your emotions. Frankenstein.
Don't touch that!
All right, Amanda.
Yes.
Give us the rundown of what happens in Frankenstein, directed by James Whale.
All right. So this iconic horror film follows the obsessed scientist Dr. Henry Frankenstein as he attempts to create life by assembling a creature from body parts of the deceased. Aided by his loyal, misshapen assistant Fritz, Frankenstein succeeds in animating his monster, but confused and traumatized, it escapes into the countryside and begins to wreak havoc. Frankenstein searches for the elusive being and eventually must confront his tormented creation.
Yes. My favorite part of this whole movie happens in the first minute and a half.
Really?
Yes. When they're digging, it opens with a grave robbery.
Yes.
And there's a shot, I don't know if it's on purpose or if it was just a really nice coincidence. I'd like to think it was on purpose, where Henry Frankenstein literally shovels dirt into the face of the Grim Reaper.
Yes.
Great shot.
Yeah, I think I have a note in my little notebook here about that one too, because I remember watching that and laughing out loud the minute it happened.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. It's really nice. Cuz it kind of sums up the entire thing.
Yeah.
At least for the first 75% of the movie. I think this movie kind of falls off story-wise towards the end. It's the monster story, I think, is pretty solid all the way through.
Yeah.
But Henry and everybody else, it just kind of gets silly after a certain point.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Did the version that you watched have the introduction?
Yes, we're the same actor who plays Dr. Veldman.
Sure.
Yeah, that
Doesn't
guy.
matter, yeah.
Where he comes out and you know, in his tuxedo and opens the curtain and kind of greets everybody and sets the stage in this wonderfully dramatic, over dramatic way of like, well, we warned you.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's showmanship, but it's also. It was also like a studio mandated warning to put in front of the movie.
Was it really?
Yeah.
It wasn't just. I kind of assumed it was just an artistic choice.
It was kind of a tongue in cheek thing where they're like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you just like warned everybody what was coming? Because this movie actually was very subversive for the time that it was made, and there was a lot of cuts that happened to it when it was released subsequently.
Really?
Most famously, when the monster comes to life, when he says,
In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God.
cut out. Because
morality censors and all of that.
There's some other little bits that were deemed too violent. The other big one is when he throws the girl into the water.
Oh, yeah.
That is cut out of the movie. So lose the sympathy and the misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So all you see is him kind of like make a move towards her. Oh. And then they have the dad walking in with the dead body. So you don't know what he did to her.
Yeesh. Yeah, because I actually think that's. I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but just because you mentioned it, I was surprised how effective that was.
Yeah.
The sort of like he's throwing these beautiful flowers into the water with her, and it's great and it's fun and they're smiling. So he assumes throwing pretty things in the water is great, and she's a pretty little girl. I'll toss her in the water; it'll be fun. And then the tragedy and like the look on the actor who plays the father. The look on his face when he's carrying her through the town and the way that everybody just falls silent as he passes, and like the background noise of the party, that, you know, how it progressively dies down as he makes his way through, and the music eventually like kind of cuts out and the dancing stops. I just thought that was really great.
Yeah, he walks through the town of Europe, I guess.
Germany.
Yeah,
it's somewhere in Germany because they're Herr whoever.
Yeah.
You know?
It's
Frankenstein.
One of my favorite things about the Universal monster movies is that most of them take place in this weird amalgam of like what an American person who's never left the country would think Europe is like.
Well, and it's tough to locate this movie in both space and time.
Right.
Like what era is this?
I don't know, because it looks like it could be the 1800s, but at the same time, Henry Frankenstein has a really modern looking watch on, you know?
Yeah,
so there's like,
there's these little details where you're a little, and I should know better, but I feel like grave diggers and body snatchers and that whole thing were sort of.
That was like, 1800s England.
But closer to the turn of the century, though.
I think so.
Yeah.
And you know, that's something that I think is such a plus for these movies, because they end up becoming almost more timeless and more fairy tale like, because they are not locked into a specific time period. They don't feel like, I feel like if you watch this movie, it doesn't feel dated the way watching like a Friday the 13th movie feels dated.
Right.
You know?
Right. Or like when we talked about Scream on Real Ripe, Real Rotten.
Yeah.
Because that was dated in a very intentional way. It very much wanted to feel of that moment in time. And this one definitely goes kind of in the opposite direction of being this amorphous sometime in the past, somewhere in Europe.
Yeah, and the filmmaking might feel a little dated. I mean, I didn't even realize it's only an hour and 10 minutes. It's super short.
Snappy.
Yeah, I almost watched it twice because I watched it and I was like, shit, I should watch it with the commentary. I may as well. But the beginning, I would say up until the point where he creates the monster.
Yeah.
All of those scenes are really functional.
Yeah, and
they're very like, this is what we're doing. This is where we need to go. End of scene,
Yeah, they're functional. It's interesting because they're functional. They're like very specifically on this very narrow narrative track.
Mm-hmm.
They don't diverge even a little bit. Like there's this scene, the first scene with Elizabeth and Victor,
Mm-hmm.
and you gather pretty quickly that she's his girlfriend, Dr. Frankenstein's girlfriend or fiance.
Yeah.
You get that pretty quickly, but like, who the hell is Victor?
Right.
Where the hell are they talking?
Yeah,
because,
they seem to be friends, I guess.
Yeah, they seem to be friends. He seems to kind of have a thing for her, but is it like, is this a jilted lover, a former suitor?
Well, Victor is Henry's best man at his wedding.
Right, so they are probably best friends, but you're not given that information clearly until halfway through the movie and when they're getting married.
Right.
And one of my notes was about Elizabeth was just like, where the hell does she live?
Yeah.
Because that first scene in that building, I was like, she lives in a museum, a castle?
Well,
but then you realize it's not her house.
Yeah. It's Frankenstein's house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's his dad, the Baron.
Right.
My hero.
Which is one of the really interesting things about this, because there's so much like, it's not really world building because they don't really do much world building. They just kind of throw elements at you and they work because they're fairly archetypal, I think.
Yeah.
So you've got the Baron of the town. I don't really know. He seems to be very important to the town.
Maybe if we were more familiar with how landed nobility worked in continental Europe during the 1800s,
in fake continental Europe,
fake
yes.
continental Europe, we'd feel a little more comfortable.
I'm not sure what a burgermeister is, but he seems to have a very pivotal role. But the Frankenstein. You learn that the Frankenstein family is very well regarded.
Yes.
And that this wedding that's supposed to be happening is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because the burgermeister, I think, says that, the wedding is a big deal. I think he literally says something like that.
Well, they talk about how the townspeople want to know when it's
Right.
going to be, and everybody's planning for it. It's this very big community event.
Right.
It's almost like a town holiday.
But they don't tell you why. Like, you don't know who Elizabeth is.
Right.
What family she's from that makes this a big deal, whether or
Yeah.
not it's, I mean, the reason they don't tell you that is because honestly it doesn't matter, because it's not really what the story's about.
Yeah, there's something kind of refreshing about the way that this movie really whittles everything down to its most essential elements and doesn't bother you with this sort of extraneous details that, some people might like to know. It might cross your mind. Like it definitely crossed my mind to say, well, where the heck is Elizabeth from? Where's her family? Like, she's got bridesmaids, but they don't really seem to give much of a shit about her.
Right. She's got bridesmaids who I'm not convinced are different actresses than the ones who are playing the maids of the house. Because it's just like, we found 4 women, we'll put them in some costumes.
Can we talk about this is a really dumb detail, but my favorite moment in this whole movie has nothing to do with horror and nothing to do with, Grim Reaper imagery. It's when they pour the champagne for the house staff and the butler, and there's 4 maids. The butler takes a sip, 3 of the maids take a dainty little sip, and the one maid on the end just downs that whole
She's smart. Yeah.
Oh, she's the best.
Because
loved her
I was
immediately.
watching that too, like they took one sip and then put it down, and then there's
and
one
that
who's
one
just
maid
like,
who
boom.
was just like, I am gonna live this life.
And like the butler kind of looks at her like, yeah, you know what's up.
Yeah, exactly. I loved it.
Yeah. But yeah, it's looking at it, I think you're right. It's very lean. It's only an hour. And the information they give you is only the essential stuff you need, because if you look at Henry Frankenstein, the character, we meet him like halfway through his story. We don't see why he's trying to bring people back from the dead. What he was doing before this, what he's had to do to get to this point. We've got him right before he gets what he wants.
Yeah.
And what's nice about that is the rest of the movie is essentially, well, I guess this kind of goes into why it kind of falls apart for me. I sorry, we skipped over the big overview thing. Do you enjoy this movie? I got so into just the details of the trivia that I just jumped.
We both did. This is both of our faults. I think I enjoyed it because I know it's a classic.
Yeah.
And it's so iconic, and there's so many things that reference back to it. Even the "It's Alive" scene.
I would
that.
say this is the most iconic horror movie of all time.
I don't know if I would say it's this or Dracula.
I was thinking that too, but Dracula has like one element. It's like just basically Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
But Frankenstein has the monster. He's got the laboratory. He's got the lines. He's got, it feels like this is the most referenced and the movie that created as much of, Frankenstein, you move 2 clicks to the left and you've got like giant monster movies.
Yeah, yeah, and then you've also got things like The Fly and all sorts of mad scientists.
It occurred to me halfway through that this movie is actually very similar to First Blood, the first Rambo movie.
You're going to yell at me when I say this. I haven't seen it.
This will be the last episode of the Rotten Horror Picture Show.
We've had a good run.
Next time, we'll be back with the first episode of Amanda Watches Rambo. Which we will do 200 episodes.
200 episodes of Sylvester Stallone.
No, but I mean, it's the similar kind of story about a creation who is then shunned by its creator, and then is misunderstood and then hunted by the people that he's just trying to be. He's not trying to hurt anybody. He's just trying to live his life, and then he gets hunted down by these people who hate and fear him because they don't understand him.
It's interesting.
And he's forced to push back.
I'm going to get real English major on you right
please
now.
Do.
Because pretty much a lot of what you just said sums up the way the book itself was treated. Because Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote it, started writing it when she was 18 years old.
Which is crazy.
And pregnant with her second child.
Which is crazy.
The first one had died.
Ooh. Well, all right. Well, I guess that explains why she wrote the book.
Yeah. But then she didn't. When it first comes out, it comes out pretty quickly after she starts it. It doesn't take. It takes a couple of years, I think. But when it comes out, she doesn't put her name on it.
Right.
So it comes out as this anonymous piece of literature,
which is mind blowing.
Yeah,
like if this book, if I don't know what the equivalent of that would be. Like if Harry Potter, came out with no name on it, and it just was like, oh, where did this come from?
Holy shit. But yeah, it came out, and then she subsequently spent many years kind of trying in different ways, even after she took credit for it, to sort of distance herself from it. So she created this kind of horrifying thing, put it out there into the world, and then kind of tried to take a step back from it and be like, oh no, I don't know. I had this really vivid dream. It just all came to me in a dream.
Yeah, like, I wonder how she would respond if someone talked to her today and was like, you literally created the genre of science fiction. Yeah. That's because I've heard a lot of places say that she is the godmother, if you will, of science fiction.
Yeah, and you can see why. I mean, like, if you do ever read the book, it's all from, maybe not all, but the vast majority of it is from the point of view of Frankenstein. Right. So it's his papers, his letters, his journals. Right. Very much the way Dracula is written in this sort of collection of documents style. So you get a little more of this like pseudo-scientific jargon in it, which is kind of wonderful.
Which is really funny to me, though, because my favorite part of the book is the scene where the monster comes to life, which in the movie is very highly stylized. You've got like lightning and shit and all this technical stuff.
Raising him up through the hole in the roof.
Yeah, the little bit that I feel gets lost to the sands of time is that it's not lightning that does it. It's this weird, undefined ultraviolet ray or
Yeah,
something.
it's like the rays
Yeah,
that
when he gets in
originally
his-
caused life.
He gets in his teacher's face and he's like, "You said that the ultraviolet ray was the best ray, but I found a better one, and it's going to bring this guy to life."
better ray.
But in the book, it's I was watching a thing, a making of or documentary thing about the movie, and they quoted the line from where he comes to life in the book, and it is so sparse. It basically says, "Surrounded by the instruments of life, I toiled into the night until my candle burned down, and it was then when the candle was almost out that I saw the hideous eye open." And I'm like, oh man, I identify with that so much. I don't want to do the work and figure out like what science shit that I would have there. It's like, you know what? Whatever you need to bring someone back to life, I had that there.
Yes,
and I was using
don't
that.
want to tell you because
Right.
it's bad and
Yeah.
you shouldn't do it.
Which you can get away with that in a book, but you
Yes.
can't get away with that in a movie.
Yeah. So how did you feel? I get the feeling that you really you seem to have a great deal of affection for this movie.
I love
think.
this movie.
Yeah.
I really, really love this movie. I actually I hadn't watched it in a while. And I think I got more out of it this time than I had previously, because it was the first time that I was thinking about a few things as I was watching it, specifically from that opening scene where the guy comes out, where his name's Edward Van Sloan is the actor, comes out and gives you that warning, that sort of tongue-in-cheek,
Yeah.
we're
Treehouse of
having fun.
horrors.
Yeah, we're having fun, but at the same time, you're going to see some shit. And I was thinking about why this was so subversive. And I realized that a lot of it is because it's not a battle of good and evil. This isn't Dracula, where the monster is evil and everybody else is good and you have to stop the monster. This one is specifically about the failings of a human being who does some pretty awful shit and ultimately doesn't pay a price for it.
Yeah.
And the subversiveness of that, it's very morally ambiguous. It's got child murder in it. It's got a lot of death across it. It opens with a grave robbing, like for the time, a pretty graphic grave robbing sequence where you can like hear the dirt hitting the coffin and stuff.
I mean, especially for this was 1931. This came out. I mean, actual frequent grave robbings they were probably mostly a thing of the past by that point, but they were still something that had been up until fairly recently happening on a regular basis.
Yeah. And this was, they're giving that to you right away. And you're not going to see that. Even in Dracula, you don't see stuff like this. Dracula is if Dracula came out in the same year, way more tame than this movie as far as the stuff that you're actually seeing.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you go back and you look at where horror movies were up to this point, this is really the first one that makes the human the monster.
Yes.
Because you've got Dracula, vampire is the monster. Nosferatu, vampire is the monster.
Yeah.
Phantom of the Opera, the Phantom is the monster.
Yeah.
Cabinet of Dr. Caligari,
Oh,
that
so good.
weird dude is the monster, but he's like clearly a bad guy.
Right. He's also like questionably supernatural.
Right. And this is the first time that you're really presenting your audience with the inverse of that, where, well, no, the monster is actually the good guy. If you want to go there. Debatably.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say he's the good guy, but
he's a victim.
He's a victim, yes. Yeah. And his story is really heartbreaking. Like the final scene in the movie, the final scene in the movie is weird, but the second, what should have been the final scene in the movie is him burning to death inside the windmill horrifically, and it's legitimately heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And I have notes about that too, about how the cutting back and forth between the mob and the sounds of the mob and the sounds of the flames, and then cutting back to the monster just kind of screaming in this very high pitched but like very human sound of panic is like very heartbreaking. Yeah.
And the theme through the movie of just so this movie, the guy who made this movie, James Whale, was a soldier in the First World War. And so much of the horror of the 20th century starts as a direct result of people who were in the First World War reacting to the First World War. And I can see that in this because the book that I'm currently writing takes place during World War I, so I've been reading a lot of this stuff. And I can see this sort of theme in the movie of someone with a lot of power setting something in motion that he has no idea what the consequences are going to be just because he can do it. And then it gets way out of hand and he basically just sort of washes his hands of it and walks away.
Yeah. There's this really weird, like, mid-movie pivot that happens with the character of Henry Frankenstein.
He just goes home.
Yeah, well, and he kind of becomes a different person.
Yeah, he does.
He when you're first introduced to him, he's this very bizarre, sort of sinister, like, mad scientist type who's crawling through the dirt in graveyards with his, like, very strange assistant who is also, speaking of not getting background information and not getting an explanation.
Yeah.
Fritz is like, okay, where did you find this guy?
No idea.
What are his qualifications? Why are you letting him help you?
He can apparently shimmy up a pole real nice.
He climbs ropes real good too. So
not great with stealing brains though.
Yeah. But excellent with torches. And the first half of the movie, you've got this Dr. Frankenstein who is this madman who has gone past the bounds of ethics and decency.
Right.
And then midway through, he is just like, oh, yeah, this isn't fun anymore.
He kind of...
And then they cut to this scene where they're sitting on like a patio in a beautiful like woodsy yard with like dogs laying at their feet, and she's like lighting his cigarette for him, and he's in his like PJs, just like lounging in the sun.
She's like, finally we can get married, and he's like, yes, finally. That's great, sweetie.
Yeah.
But yeah, he goes. It's almost like the beginning of the movie was him out on a bender. Yeah. And then he comes home and he's like, man, that was nuts.
Yeah, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah, I mean...
Baby, I promise this was the last time.
Whew. Anyway, what's for lunch, you know?
Yeah.
And I for some reason, I started picturing Rick from Rick and Morty. With how casually he just like throws the monster away.
Yeah. He's, I'm done with this.
Because after there's one scene where the monster freaks out because of the fire, and then he's like, "Well, this was a huge failure." You just built a human out of scraps.
You brought something back to life, but oh man, no, I was actually talking to my husband about this earlier. And I said that if there was a like true remake of this movie that was made now, I would want Bill Hader to be Dr. Frankenstein.
Okay.
I think he would be great at it because there is that like he's so over the top and ridiculous for the first half of the movie, and then he just pivots and is like, no, I think I'm just going to be a normal guy now.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
That's something that I did want to bring up as well, because this movie was considerably scary at the time.
Yeah.
Frankenstein, probably at the bottom of the list of scary monsters now.
Yeah.
I would love to know what it would take to make Frankenstein scary again, because he's the only one that they haven't really... They do a Frankenstein movie like once every 10 years, and it never works. And I don't know what you would have to do to make it as equally challenging and subversive as this is.
Yeah.
But I would really like to see somebody try. I think you would have to make a pretty fucked up movie, I think, which I'm here for.
Yeah, but I also think part of the problem is that, it's Boris Karloff, who is just a fucking treasure.
Yeah.
Like
he's a monster legend twice over.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, that's like getting inducted into the Hall of Fame as a solo act and as part of a band.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, he went through so much physically to portray the monster the way he did. Like I was reading something about how he hurt his back because he's actually carrying around the actor who plays Dr. Frankenstein, and like he was like 45 when this movie was made.
Yeah.
And he screwed up his back so bad that he had back problems for the rest of his life.
Right.
He had dental work. He had a partial bridge, and he took it out for this film, so that's why he's got that sunken cheek.
I'm glad you brought that up,
Yeah.
because my favorite bit of makeup it's not really trivia, but it's something that's fun to watch, is that so he took that piece out, it sinks his cheek in, and they shaded it up to make him look more like a corpse.
Yes.
That shading became just part of the makeup for everybody else who played the monster, who was not as skinny as he is. So by the time you get to Bela Lugosi playing Frankenstein, it just looks like a beauty mark. It's just one of those stupid little things that doesn't translate.
Clay trivia.
Yeah. But I was thinking about it, and I think the closest thing that comes to hitting the right kind of pocket is Reanimator, which is very much a Frankenstein movie, and is also very on the edge and subversive for the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think you'd have to go pretty dark to make something that was as effective as this is now.
Yeah, I think that's true, because I think when this movie came out, I mean, I can just only speculate, but I think Karloff's appearance was so iconic. His physical presentation was so immediately horrifying that he didn't need to be evil.
Right.
He didn't need to, like, you know, he kills the little girl, which is horrifying, but it's horrifying in a dual way, where it's horrifying because the little girl dies, but it's also horrifying because he doesn't understand what he's really done until it's over, and then he knows he's done something wrong. He looks panicked, he runs away. But I think what makes this movie frightening when I watch it now, at least, is that, yeah, you know, the humans are the monsters in it.
Right.
I think that's the tricky part. If you were to try to remake it now and try to make Frankenstein's monster scary again, it would almost change the nature of the character.
Well, you know, after they stopped making these movies, and Universal stopped making these movies in like the 50s, early 50s, Hammer Studios in England kind of picked up the baton, because all of this stuff is public domain as long as you don't use the iconic makeups.
Yeah.
So they started doing Frankenstein and Dracula and Wolfman. Well, not Wolfman because that's copyrighted, but the really smart thing that they did was they were making Frankenstein movies where Dr. Frankenstein is explicitly the villain of the movie.
Yeah.
And it is every single time they do it, it is the monster is some sort of victim or some sort of unwilling participant. And Peter Cushing as the doctor gets progressively eviler and eviler through each movie. I'm looking forward to when we get to one of our 5-spot movies, when we do Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, which is one of my favorite movies. But
well, that's interesting, because it's a very different take on the Dr. Frankenstein character, because in this movie he's almost kind of impotent.
Yeah.
He manages to bring the monster to life, but he doesn't manage to successfully do much beyond that. Like he can't fight the monster. He can't take control of his third of the mob that he leads into the mountains. He's like, no way.
He's not even assertive about any of it. Like even that thing at the end, there's no assertion from him about trying to find. He's just like, all right, I guess I'll go left. He
spends more time fainting or unconscious. Jesus.
Yeah.
Thanks. He's almost in, even, you know, obviously Elizabeth has her damsel in distress moments, but he's actually much more of a damsel in distress, which is, I think, an interesting positioning for a character that, you know, should have a lot more agency throughout this.
It's very interesting because he is positioned as the hero in the second half of the movie.
Yeah, but it's all his fault.
And he's really bad at it, like you said. And impotent is a really interesting word to use, because through this watch again, I noticed that one of the things that I always could never figure out is, why is he using pieces of bodies? Like, if he's just bringing somebody back from the dead, why do you need to piece a body together?
Yeah.
And it was this time is the first time I've ever picked up on a line where he says, I'm not bringing something back from the dead. I'm creating new life.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Why, he's not, because his drive, and I think they do this in a lot of the other versions, his drive is not like correcting something that has gone wrong. Like, it's not because someone in his past has died.
Right.
And he's like, I need to figure out how to bring people back from the dead.
Right.
He's literally saying, like, fuck God. I'm going to do this myself, and I'm going to make a new life.
But he's also trying to take on a mother role.
He's making a new life without a woman. Essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
But that puts him in this like sort of position of a mother, and
Right.
I think it's that's entirely because of Mary Shelley's. She wrote the book, and
Right.
and it's her narrative, and I think very much pregnancy and childbirth were her life at the time. So I think that it's interesting when you get a male character who has that focus on wanting to make his own life and bring something into the world that's entirely his own and is completely new.
And he throws it away so quickly.
Yeah.
Like,
which is crazy.
Yeah, we were joking about it before, but it is shocking how quickly he just is like, well, that's done.
Yeah.
I'll leave this to my doctor friend to destroy and just
Right.
go on with my life.
Right. Too bad that didn't work out.
Yeah. And, one of the things that's nice about when you start a story the way that they do, with him so far into the process of getting what he wants ultimately, then that leaves so much more room for the consequences of what happens when he does get what he wants.
Yeah, that's a good point.
However, one of the ways that this movie fails, which we've kind of said a few times already, is he doesn't ultimately suffer any consequences from this stuff, which is part of what I think is ends up being fairly... I think part of what made this movie difficult at the time is that they keep trying to squeeze Dr. Frankenstein into this like hero role.
Yes.
But he's the cause of everything.
Yeah.
And if you're squeezing him into the hero role, ultimately that means he doesn't suffer from the consequences of the bad thing.
Right. He's
because
supposed
he
to
wins.
Yes, he's supposed to get the girl at the end.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's this weird, like the second half of the movie becomes this really weird thing where I feel like that's what causes the impotence from his not being able to act, because he can't effectively deal with the consequences of stuff he created, because he has to be the one who wins at the end.
Right. And it's interesting because if you take the ending, the kind of Hollywood ending out of it, and you just look at the action of the film around him, he tries to create a new life, and arguably he succeeds. He brings something back to life.
Oh, yeah.
But arguably he fails. He feels like he fails.
Sure.
He drops out of university.
Right. Yep.
He's supposed to get married, but he never actually does.
No, not in the movie anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. He just kind of consistently misses the mark and can't close the deal
Right.
on pretty much everything. Yeah. Even at the very end, if it ended with a wedding scene, it would have made more sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I guess the original ending of the movie was Frankenstein and the monster both die. So I
would have preferred that.
Yeah. And so when they get to that final scene, that was shot afterwards, that's not even Colin Clive in the room. He's like,
oh, really?
Yeah. He's out of focus, so they just used a different actor.
That's great.
The Frankenstein's father, who is this he's an interesting character because he's
the Baron.
Yeah, he's a very common character in these James Whale horror movies where there's always one character who's kind of campy and over the top.
Yeah.
And in this one it's the Baron. Bride of Frankenstein's got 5 of them, but there's always one. There's always one who's
at least one.
Yeah, who's a tension break character where he's gonna do some silly shit.
But I love him.
He's pretty good. And at the end, they talk about how he's in bad shape, but he'll be fine. And the maids bring him this wine to drink.
Yes.
And the father's like, he probably shouldn't drink. I'll drink it myself. And they call back to the engagement party scene.
Yes.
Where he raises his glass and he says, here's a toast to a son of the House of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And that scene was like so goofy. And then they get to the end and he says that line, and I was like, man, that is so subversively on like right on the right track for this movie, because that's what the monster is.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Like I actually watched the kind of end, say 20 minutes, like twice.
Mm-hmm. So half the movie.
Yeah. I mean, maybe a third.
Yeah.
But a lot happens in it. Like,
sure.
Like so much happens in a very short amount of time. And yeah, the first time I watched it, I was just like, why are they ending with that? And then I noticed that it's not to my son, it's a son of the House of Frankenstein.
And it's I was reading or watching that I think they speculate that James Whale wrote that scene himself.
Oh.
Which makes a lot of sense to me, because that is a very tongue-in-cheek way to end this movie.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, even in that scene, Henry's in bed, damaged.
Yes.
Being like
cared for
by his still not yet wife.
Yes.
And very much is in an impotent state.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So speaking of impotence, or lack thereof, the scene where the monster attacks Elizabeth.
Yes.
How do you feel about that scene? What are your thoughts?
I have thoughts on a couple different levels.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think part of the inclusion of it is the stereotypical, we have a beautiful woman and we have a monster. Mm-hmm. And that's just what you do. You put the monster in a room with the beautiful woman. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think taken all together in this film, it's just another mark of how impotent Henry Frankenstein really is. I mean, he locks her in that room by herself. And she is in some way violated by this monster. Mm-hmm. I think you can read it as a sexual violation. It's the subtext is definitely there. She's in her wedding dress, which is very symbolic.
That scene in and of itself, for the time, probably blew some minds, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that one barely squeaked by the censors, because she ends up fainted on her back on a bed.
Right.
After this large, monstrous figure comes into the room and attacks her.
Does something off screen.
Yes. But at the same time, if you look at it in the full context of the movie and what the monster tends to do, I don't think it would make sense to say literally he violated her sexually.
Right.
I don't think that fits with that character, but I think it is a symbolic way of showing how little power and how little efficacy that Henry Frankenstein has over his own life. He can't even protect the woman he wants to marry. He can't even marry her.
Right.
Like,
arguably doesn't want to. You know?
Yeah. There's definitely something.
Also, James Whale, openly gay. So read into Henry what you will.
Yeah, I think you can.
Or maybe closeted gay. I can't remember. I think he was openly gay.
I'm not sure, honestly, but I think you can.
At the time, didn't matter. I think it was tough either way. So.
Yeah. No matter what you're in for. But I think looking at Henry, I think you can like read a lot of that subtext into it. Even his relationship with Victor.
Yeah.
Where he clearly loves and trusts and relies on Victor and sort of puts everything, his own life, his fiance's life, his home, like Victor's hanging out with his dad.
Do you think Henry would care if he found out that Victor was sleeping with Elizabeth?
I
kind of feel like it wouldn't really bother.
I feel like he'd be like, well, but can I still marry her?
I feel like it depends on what part of the story. Like if he hasn't created the monster and he's in work mode, I'm sure he's like, yeah, yeah, whatever. Do whatever you want.
Well, I even think after that he would be a little bit like, look, I get it, but like, can I still marry her? And then can we all just live together?
Yes.
I think that would be his dream. He'd be like, I have
Yeah.
a beautiful wife. My dad would be happy. I would have like the person I actually have feelings for, which is this handsome, strapping man who's
Yeah.
going to keep coming to save
We
me.
have one big bed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he would love being in a throuple.
Yeah.
I do. And I actually think there's something to be said for the fact that in the novel Frankenstein, the doctor is Victor Frankenstein.
Sure.
He's not Henry Frankenstein.
Yeah, which is one of those weird changes that everybody like.
I don't know why. Do you know anything about why they did that?
I don't. I know that the story that the movie it comes from is like much like Dracula. It's based on a play which had been written and rewritten a bunch of times since the book came out.
Okay.
So it's one of those things where it's like all the stuff from the book got crunched down to work as a stage play.
Okay.
And then that stuff then got adapted into a film. So
that's how we ended up with Henry Frankenstein and Call Me By Your Name, Victor, whatever his last name was. Because that's kind of the vibe it gives me.
Brokeback Burgermeister. Anyway. I don't know specifically why they changed the names, but it's one of those things where it's like now it's like, oh, it's Victor Frankenstein.
Yes.
He's like a baron. It's like, no, those are 3 different characters in this movie.
Yeah.
His assistant's name Igor, right? No, his name's Fritz. Igor doesn't show up until like the 3rd movie. Well, the reason I brought up the attack of Elizabeth is because it's another one where watching it this time, it read a lot differently than when I was younger. Because when I was younger, it's like, oh, he's the monster. Yeah, he's attacking her. And in the book, the monster specifically, because the monster's a lot smarter in the book.
Yes.
He
By a lot.
specifically attacks Elizabeth because he is trying to attack Victor. Or
Yes.
Dr. Frankenstein. This, he doesn't have that mindset in this movie.
Yeah, there's not a grand plan.
Right. And one of the things I was watching said, the guy was like, well, as it gets, there's some plot contrivances, like, why does he attack Elizabeth? There's no way he would know who she was or even what her significance was. Like, there's no way he could be doing that to get back at Henry or something like that.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me, watching the scene again, he's not doing it. This is how I read it anyway. He's not doing it because he thinks he's getting back at Henry. I think this guy's correct. He doesn't know that stuff.
Yeah.
I think he's just horny because everything else he does in the movie is very animalistic. I'm not saying that he actively
Sure. No, I understand.
But the thing that sells it to me, because everything else he does in the movie is very animalistic and very instinctual.
Yeah.
And the thing that sells it to me is it's another little bit of like tongue-in-cheek subversion is when she screams, he doesn't go, ah, he goes,
I kind of missed that.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He was just like weird growl where he's like, and I was like, oh man, this actually, if that works on both
like,
levels.
hubba.
Yeah, essentially. That works on both levels because if you're not reading him as the sympathetic character, it looks like he's the monster attacking this woman. But if you're reading him as this instinctual animal, it's very much like he's like, oh, there's an attractive woman in this room. I'm gonna go, do whatever.
Yeah.
And it's another. Obviously, it's not great. Whatever he does, much like throwing the girl in and killing the girl is not great, or killing any of the other people he kills in this movie.
Yeah.
But it is another. If that's the intention, it is another bit of misunderstanding on this character, on this monster's part, or on the people's part towards the monster, and it's another fucking thing that Henry did.
Yeah, I mean, so my reading of it in this movie, ignoring the novel and other interpretations, in this specific movie, I always thought that the scene most closely connected thematically to the attack on Elizabeth is the scene with, is it Maria, the little girl? Is she Maria?
Sure.
I think so. I think that there is something more human in the monster, which is what makes him so sympathetic. I don't think he's just purely animal instinct.
Sure.
I think he has an appreciation for beauty.
Okay. Yeah.
And because he sitting with this, very pretty little girl, and I don't mean pretty in like a creepy way. I just mean genuinely, she's an adorable little girl, and they're playing with flowers next to a beautiful lakeside, and that's the moment he's happiest in the whole film. And I think he has this sort of instinctual human appreciation for things that are beautiful. And I think he spots Elizabeth through the windows, and she's looking at her most, they say women are their most beautiful on their wedding days. Right. That's sort of a cliche.
It's all downhill from there.
Exactly. Trust me. No, I'm kidding. But no, she's looking really lovely. She's dressed up. She looks gorgeous. And I think he sees that and he's like, aha, a pretty thing.
Right.
And I don't even think, I think it very well could be and probably is supposed to be sexual in some level. But I think there's also an argument to be made for him just wanting to experience something beautiful.
Sure.
Because his entire existence from start to finish, other than these couple short glimpses, is just like pain, confusion, misery, and horror.
Right.
So I mean, I think in a weird way it is,
I think your explanation makes more sense than mine does.
Well, I also think there's room for both. I don't think it has to be one or the other.
I think you're right, because I think part of what makes that work so well is that you don't see what happens.
Yeah.
And you don't even really see him grab her, from what I remember.
Yeah, you see him kind of get close to her and sort of make a move towards her, but you don't see him. It's not like he picks her up or he grabs her by the arms or something.
And whatever struggle happens after that could have been a struggle very similar to with the little girl.
Yeah.
Where he doesn't know what's going on, but she's freaking out.
Right, right. And maybe because she's an adult woman, she freaks out hard enough that he just drops her on the bed and she faints.
Right.
Very much like Henry Frankenstein would faint.
Yes. The model of a great Lovecraftian protagonist is always fainting at the most inopportune point. Do you have a favorite scene in the movie? Or what's your favorite part of the movie?
I think my favorite part of the movie,
I guess we kind of already covered that. But.
I mean, we touched on it a little bit. I think in the end I kind of have to agree with you that it's the beginning for me, where they are doing the sort of Burke and Hare style grave robbing. Because there's just such a wonderful mix of comedy in the midst of these very would have now become horror tropes, which I'm sure back then were much more startling and like jarring, like you said, like this fairly realistic scene of a burial and digging things back up, cutting the body down from the gallows.
I do have to amend my statement a little bit, because I guess Hunchback of Notre Dame did exist before this, so that's more of a people versus an misunderstood. But just forget that movie existed and just assume that I'm right.
Yeah. I think we should change the name of this podcast to Assume Clay's Right.
Well, I mean, it's the name of my life. I don't know why anything else should be different.
Yeah, but I do. I think for me, that beginning, because it captures so much of the sort of Victorian Gothic sensibility that I love so much.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
Like so many of my notes from watching this movie are just like the sets,
right,
with underlines underneath.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover?
Well, I don't know. The sets really like in terms of his laboratory in the abandoned castle is just so, there's so much, it's so dense, it's sort of like this maximalist idea.
They're so tall. Everything like those sets, everything has a huge ceiling.
Everything goes up really, really high. Let me see what else. I do have a note from the scene with the little girl. That cat is real.
Yeah.
That's a real cat that she's just like swinging around.
That cat was not happy. It had a look on its face like, this is, I'm gonna die.
Shut up. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big thing for me. What about you? Is there anything we haven't touched on that you want?
Well, I wanted to mention the music in that there is none.
Yeah.
And, because music becomes such a big part of horror movies. And this early in film history, they were only really doing music in the beginning and end credits like they do in this, and they also do in Dracula. I think it's more effective in Dracula because they use Swan Lake, which is one of the best pieces of music ever written.
Yeah.
The music in this is fairly forgettable, and it's just really interesting to me that 4 years later, you've got Bride of Frankenstein that has full music, like music through the whole movie, and very identifiable score to it. That once we watch that, I don't know how familiar with you are with it.
I haven't seen that one actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah,
it's real weird. Like it's
I'm
very
sure.
strange.
The premise alone.
Yeah, it's like how Batman Returns.
Yeah.
Is like. They kind of let Tim Burton off the leash a little bit and just said, just do a Tim Burton movie with Batman in it.
Yeah, and things got real weird.
Yeah, Bride of Frankenstein is like, they told James Whale, just do whatever you want, and it gets weird.
Nice.
It's great, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting how empty these early movies feel without that accompanying music, because like you can just imagine what sort of gothic score would be written for a movie like this now.
Yeah.
Where everything feels so the way it is now, the way it is with no music, I think makes it feel that much more abrupt and quickly paced. Because your scenes are just kind of like, hello, this, next scene, this, next scene, this, next scene.
And you're not being emotionally prepped by a soundtrack.
Right.
I do think, though, in terms of sound engineering, there's a lot of sound effects.
Oh, yeah.
In this,
Big time.
the cranking of the gears as they raise up the gurney,
the electric stuff climbing up those,
the dogs barking as the mob chases him through the woods. Like, yeah, there's a lot to be said for the sound itself. But yeah, that's an interesting point that there's no actual soundtrack. Yeah,
and I was going to mention the body count and the survivor count, but we kind of already went over that. It does. I think my favorite part of the movie is the burning windmill at the end, just because it is so. If you're along for the ride for that movie, that sequence is just so heartbreaking. Watching him, I mean, Boris Karloff is a fucking trooper.
Yeah, seriously.
But it also features a great non-death from Henry Frankenstein, where he gets gorilla press thrown off the balcony, hits the arm of the windmill,
and then
which then swings over and he falls
down
off of that thing. And then they're like, we should probably get him home. He's going to need a nap.
Take him back home.
Yeah, it's so funny that he's not dead, because it's like they shoot that to be like, oh, he's clearly dead.
Yes.
He doesn't just fall into a bunch of people. He hits a bunch of shit on the way down.
Yeah, even if they had him falling into like a hay bale at the bottom, I'd be like, all right, he landed in something soft. He's probably fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, he breaks his spine on a windmill piece and then flops to the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that pretty much does it.
I think so.
Who would you recommend this to?
I would recommend this to people who like classic black and white movies in general. I actually think they'd enjoy it. I would recommend this to people who want to go into the sciences.
Yeah. I would recommend it to people who like grave robbing and absentee fathers. I think that's gonna do it. I think we've talked about that for long enough.
Yeah. So what are we gonna do next time?
I hit the randomizer and we landed on number 170, which is Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Oh, you must be so excited.
I am excited because that was the alternate for when we were doing Real Ripe and Real Rotten when we did Wes Craven. So I'm going to try and get Wes back on to talk about that. So
two Wes's, one podcast.
Yeah, he's real busy though, so he doesn't really do many podcasts anymore.
Really?
No, he does them every friggin' day. I don't know how he finds the time to do it.
You got me. You were so deadpan on that one. I was like, wait a second, what happened to Wes?
Anyway, so thanks for listening, and we will see you next time with Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Dun, dun, dun.